bachelor in media studies at the University of
Siegen.
Siegen. She, as a media studies graduate student, she focuses on internet research. She has been working in many projects, and among the others at the Alexander von Humboldt Institute for Internet and Society. Okay, thank you. And currently she works in two research projects, one with Professor Jens Eder of the Film University and one with Professor Judith Ackermann, University of Applied Sciences in Potsdam. And until September 2018, she was a scholarship holder of the German National Scholarship Program. And she also likes to combine science with practice, and she works in several media productions, for example, for SBS Australia and UFA, and also in some student projects that involved social media storytelling. So the word to you, Rebecca. Let me take you the microphone.
Thanks. Okay. Thank you, and thanks for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. Sorry, you don't hear me. Okay. We scroll. We post, we tweet, we snap, we gram, and we don't stop scrolling. We do digital detox to disconnect from the online world, but have to announce it in social media first. Smartphones and social networks have become constant companions, especially for younger generations. At the same time, we also got used to echo chambers, algorithmic feeds, and the insidious implementation of AI techniques. With over 1 billion monthly users, Instagram is one of the most successful networks on the internet. Despite this, Instagram is still not in the spotlight of internet research compared to Twitter and Facebook. I decided to conduct an online survey because, as Farman and Lastadius stated in 2017, direct engagement with Instagram users is the area where the least amount of work has been done. It is important to conduct research about this network because, as I will show you, it plays a very important role in the everyday life of its users. The questions that lead my project are the following. How is the identity of younger people affected by platforms like Instagram? How are algorithms and AI techniques already implemented into social networks affecting a user's behavior and thereby construct the so-called self? My goal today is to demonstrate the influence of Instagram, the value it has for younger users, and in this sense, the influence of AI techniques on our identity. Moreover, I want to give an impulse to push Instagram into the spotlight of new media research. Instagram, founded in 2010, has developed several features, filters, and tools over the last years. Stories, for example, are pictures and videos that are available for only 24 hours and have become an important part of the network, as 400 million users make stories every day. In summer 2018, after they made some new changes on the Instagram algorithm, the Instagram founders decided to give some more infos about how their network works. They named the three main factors: interest, recency, and relationship, but obviously that leaves a lot of unanswered questions. So what is concealed behind the so-called Instagram algorithm? To keep it short, the processes that run Instagram are machine learning techniques, which can be described as a series of algorithms that enable IT systems to identify patterns in data and classify it in clusters. Artificial knowledge is generated through experience or the data that is available. Facebook, the company that owns Instagram, has one of the highest budgets on AI research and development. Used 3.5 billion public Instagram photos to train its image recognition AI. The key element for the training data were 17,000 hashtags that let the AI see what is in the picture. In general, AI techniques implemented in Instagram can be described as filters, and this is also the term the company itself uses. to trying to identify content that falls in specific content, like natural language processing, or to say it with the word of the Instagram founders, to keep Instagram a safe place for self-expression. Tanja Bucher describes the system used in social networks, using Facebook as an example, as, and I quote, machine learning system pieced together and layered like Lego. At the moment, I'm still in the process of a qualitative analysis of the network. However, it is obvious that the so-called Instagram algorithm, which is, for example, well known in marketing, in the marketing sector, is far more than just an algorithm. And moreover, the AI techniques that have the potential to yield a great effect on a user's behavior and the interaction with the network as well as with other users. My thesis is based on an interdisciplinary mixed method approach, combining this qualitative analysis with an empirical survey, an online survey which I will present to you in a few seconds. The work of the Canadian sociologist Irving Goffman lays the groundwork for my thesis. He analyzes the interaction and performances of individuals using the dramaturgy of the theater as a metaphor. A role, for example, used to describe the pattern of action being performed, which he also describes as different masks a person wears depending on his or her surroundings. The mask can be seen as a metaphor for a true self, a role we created ourselves. And in the course of our lives, we have different roles, which Goffman describes as personalities. Furthermore, the vision of self is a product of performance. He argues that we behave differently on the front stage as an audience is watching us, for example, me in front of you right now, than on the backstage, described as the personal room of the actor, as no performance is necessary. He describes the backstage he says the backstage is a place of hiding, so that devices like telephones could be used privately. In other words, the front stage can be described as the public and the backstage as the private. In his work on the social stigma, Goffman distinguishes between social, personal, and ego identity. However, they do not stand on their own, but contradict each other and form an interdependent relationship, a construct of identity. And this construct is constantly in danger of being questioned, unmasked, or destroyed by others. The term of self-presentation and self-exploitation are also important when talking about identity. Kremer and Haferkamp define self-presentation with regard to social networks as the process of consciously or unconsciously trying to influence the impression formed by the observer, which comes close to Goffman's definition of the front and backstage. It is important to remember that when it comes to Instagram, self-disclosure is almost as important as self-exploitation. It is the act of revealing private information to others and is thus closely related to privacy. Furthermore, they argue that self-presentation is a human need and social networks offer an easy way to satisfy this need. In conclusion, endorsing this to Goffman's theories, we actually have to ask ourselves who or what has control over our backstage. I will jump into my case study right now. So the case study consists of 80 questions. Within 2 weeks, I think it was August, I was able to reach 567 people. 80% of those live in Germany. 42% of the participants are between 25 and 30 years old. 32 are between 19 to 24. 6% are between 15 and 18, and the others are older. 70% of the participants are female, 27 male, and 3% identify with another gender. And I want to start with the topic of identity and Instagram. One woman said that I spend a lot of time on the platform and show myself in excerpts of my life on Instagram. For the majority, especially for participants under 30, Instagram seems to be naturally integrated into their daily life. This can be seen, for example, in situations where they want to take a picture simply for reasons of posting it on Instagram and talk about the things that are posted with their friends offline. Users also describe a positive influence due to other users' spiritual or political views and lifestyles, and finding friends on the platform, which is especially the case for women. I would like to stress that getting political input from Instagrammers was one of the main reasons why users think that Instagram can have a positive impact. In general, 80% think that the network is influencing their life. The participants also experience a lot of negative influence by the perfect content they are confronted with on a daily basis, and by spending too much time on the platform and therefore becoming dependent on it. In general, it appears that Instagram has influence on a person's identity construction because it is far more than just a hobby for the majority of the users. And the feature that is most important for the users are stories. 58% watch stories a few times a day, and 9% every hour, and 7% even a few times an hour. They described as more authentic, a snapshot of life, a look into another person's life, or more private. They are a huge part of self-expression and used a lot more frequently than normal posts. In general, it seems like Instagram users have at least two masks while using Instagram. One for posts, where they want to present their most perfect self, and one for stories, where they perform a different side of them. Furthermore, Instagram is an integrated part of their daily communication. The other topic I want to talk about is the awareness of algorithms and AI. And when it comes to algorithms, the users are very much aware of the implementations and changes the company makes. The major issue was the non-chronological feed, which is perceived negatively by the majority of the users. I also wanted to know whether they believe they have control over what content they see, and it turned out that 50% think that they have at least some control over what they see on Instagram. However, only 5% think that their feed is not personalized. 70% of the participants hold the opinion that there are too many ads, and only a minority thinks that these ads are attractive, which also means that the usage of AI systems, which are implemented into the social network to create the best user experience it can, will need to improve much more. Through open text questions, I was also able to identify a wish for an open discussion about how the network works, and a wish for participation to shape the network. However, this was two-sided. While one side of the users didn't really care about how the network works and just wanted to use it, the others really wanted to get to know it and have a say in the developments of Instagram. 68% also were sure that AI influences their actions on Instagram, even though there's not really anything about AI and Instagram on the internet. And asking about the future of AI in general, 50% of the participants said that they are scared of AI, mainly because they never dealt with this topic and therefore cannot predict what it will influence, and their picture of AI is framed by media coverage. To summarize, the use of Instagram can be described as an ongoing presentation and performance of an inspired, perfect but authentic self of the user, driven by algorithms and AI. With the ability of presenting their self as they wish to, it is an individual mixture of self-presentation and exploitation. In the case of Instagram, I post therefore I am is not a question but a given for the majority of the users, because the platform is integrated into their lives. Finally, government's definition of the backstage of privacy needs to be redefined into a modern sense, since we live in a world full of cameras, microphones and displays. Keeping up with the theatrical metaphors, I would like to define it as a backstage with the digital curtain, and this curtain can be operated by the individual or controlled from the outside, and in this sense it is other-directed, which means that the backstage is infiltrated by AI systems. So what exactly are the consequences of losing our backstage to AI? Firstly, Instagram is opaque. Nevertheless, we love to gram and share pieces of our life online. But we have to question what this platform does with us, not just with our data. The second point I came across was the unpredictable ways in which Instagram could influence the behavior, preferences, and self-perception if users just use what is given and do not reflect on the usage. Furthermore, Marion Foucault stated in a lecture that Facebook has entrance to the backstage, and I would like to add that it seems like Instagram is already an integrated part of it. And therefore there is a risk of going back to self-imposed immaturity, because it is easier to just use something instead of questioning it. Instagram has a profound influence on people's lives, and this needs to be recognized. We have to start an open discussion of its impact, and we also need to take the influence of this platform seriously. Thank you. Are we on a switch?
Thank you, Rebecca. You've been very fast because it took 30 minutes for your presentation, so we have plenty of time to discuss about it. So if you have a question.
Yeah, thank you. I thought it was really interesting, and I'm really glad to finally hear not a legal perspective, but a government sociological perspective. It's spot on, I think. But I was wondering, because in the flows of there's these new platforms, and then they get used, and then they get depopularized. But I always see young generations starting out being really private on it, and then retracting and understanding that they're, you know, not being private and looking for new channels. So there's always this push to find another space for sort of more private social networking with their friends. How do you see that? Do you think that's also disappearing in the end, or will that search always deliver new spaces to be private in, as it's something that we simply also want and need?
Thank you. I think it's a good question. I think for Instagram it's different in comparison to like Facebook. Yeah, Facebook. Because Instagram, it seems like everyone is really wants to share their lives or pieces they want to share of their life on this platform, even though they are very much aware of that it's not private actually. So I think I'm really not sure if like in 10 years if Instagram will still be the Instagram it is today. I'm pretty sure it's not actually. So I think there will always be a thrive for like a new platform which is better or has something else to offer than the ones that are here right now.
Is there another question? Yes, of course.
Thanks, very interesting presentation. Rather technical question, two of them. I was wondering if you would know whether Instagram's algorithm, the pattern recognition algorithm, has access to the stories that are posted, because as you pointed out, this is a totally different kind of way of interacting, you know, with the world. This is a raw material, as you mentioned, right? So not curated. So I would assume that such an algorithm could be fed with a more kind of real life, you know, inputs. And the other question is the same, but regarding the locked accounts, because I know that on Instagram you can have a locked account, and I think there's this maybe it presents this false notion of security, because many of my friends actually use these kind of locked accounts to use Instagram as a sort of photo album for their relatives, etc. But perhaps Instagram's pattern recognition algorithms do have indeed access to that, and this feeds the machine as well.
So the company's really strict about like how the algorithm works. So there's only one article about how the Instagram algorithm works. It is from TechCrunch. I think it's from July or June this year. And it's still from a marketing sector. Like the Instagram algorithm is framed from a marketing sector, so it can only make assumptions, because I'm actually in the analysis of this right now. And for the stories, yes, they have access to the stories because they are open for everyone. Like if you have a locked account, then or a private account, then they don't have access, or they can't use this data for their development, I think. And for the locked account notion of security, yeah, I talked with my supervisor about this, and he said, well, Instagram is not built to be a private platform. It is still there to like post videos and photos of yourself. So it will never be private, as I don't know. Some might think that a private account is private.
And I have another question for you, because I had the chance of reading your article, and so I appreciated it very much. You made me understand that social networks are becoming like television, because on television we all know that there are people who work inside of it and decide whether to show us something or not. We accept it, we watch television, we like it. It works like this. Sometimes we don't like it and we complain, okay. Now, you know that there are theories about the birth of new media, which say that new media have birth because we need more immediacy. We need the possibility of extending our senses in a very easy way, you know? And so we liked the social media because they were very immediate. They gave us the possibility of seeing everything about our friends, etc. Now there is an algorithm which is choosing what to show us and whether to put the digital curtain in front of our eyes. And we don't like it. Why? We accept it on television, we don't accept it on the internet, on the social media. On television it's because there are human beings doing so over there, because it's an algorithm doing so, or maybe there's another reason.
Well, with when it comes to the Instagram algorithm, it's really funny because in my survey, I mean, it's a big survey. I just told you, like, I don't know, a piece of it. About 300 open text, like the answers of an open text question were like, I hate the algorithmic feed because I'm not in control of what I see anymore, and like if I'm only watching cat videos for the whole day, I will only see cat videos in my explore feed. So I think the users really want to have control over what they see, and when it comes to television, you can swap and like look at another channel, and you can't do that with Instagram to that extent, I would say.
Thank you very much. Okay. Maybe you should come here because they are recording, and if you talk from there, they cannot hear what you say.
So I was wondering, I'm always interested in social consequences of societal consequences of social media use, but I'm always curious about psychological approaches. And then I was wondering if what's your opinion about how the use of Instagram, how people, they don't know what artificial intelligence do with their data, and people don't understand it quite right. And but there is a factor, we like to use these social networks. We have a certain pleasure in connecting to friends, to family, and in what extent it influences the willing of people to keep feeding the social network, or to not be in the social network, to migrate to another social network. At what extent do you think that these algorithms, the algorithmic content, the targeting, can influentiate the maintenance of users?
We will have another speech that will be a little bit about your question.
Thanks for the question. It's a good question again. I think it has a big influence on the willing of people, because it's already there. The algorithms are there, and people keep on using it. And Instagram is actually becoming more and more popular these days, because I think also older people are starting to use it and enjoying, I don't know, posting family photos of them. Yeah, and there's also a book, I think it's called Hooked, and it's from the human-computer interaction sector, and they explain exactly how people get hooked by social networks in the way social networks are created. So that's, yeah, a recommendation, I guess.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Now we can switch to the next presentation of Eliane, if I well remember. Yeah. I don't remember the order, but. So first of all, a few words about Eliane Bucher. Bucher is the right way to pronounce your, yeah? Eliane is an assistant professor with the Nordic Center for Internet and Society at BNI Norwegian Business School in Oslo. She completed her doctorate in management at the University of St. Gallen, where she's also a lecturer in media and communication management, and her current research centers on digital labor practices and platforms, including algorithmic labor, which is what she's going to talk about, as well as modes of collaborative access-based consumption. And so I leave the word to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we switched up the order of the talk a little bit, which incidentally works very well, I think, because there's a lot of themes that are in common between this presentation and between the previous presentation of Rebecca. Not just the one thing in common that we're both going to be talking about curtains in one fashion or another. I'm honored to be here. I'm very, very happy to get a chance to present to you some research that is ongoing right now at the Nordic Center for Internet and Society, the NCIS, as we like to call ourselves. My colleague Christoph Lutz is right over there, also with us at the Nordic Center. And if you ever wish to visit us, we're always happy to host visitors. Just maybe come in May. Probably is a good year to visit Oslo. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the alienating effect of algorithmic decision making. We're not a center that is grounded and set in law. We don't have a background in law and ethics. We are approaching this topic more from the platform side, more from the side of communications and media studies, and from the side of social psychology. So we're not going to be trying to unpack the algorithm itself. So we're not going to be able, or we're not going to be interested in looking behind the curtain and figuring out exactly what are the variables, what are the weights that are employed in a specific algorithm. We're more interested in how people make sense of what they assume to be behind the algorithm, how they conceptualize the decision-making processes, the decision-making mechanisms that lie ultimately behind the curtain. So we're going to be talking about the man behind the curtain, but it's going to be about the assumptions that others make about him or about her. We're going to, or it, right, exactly. So we are presenting a study that we did based on digital work platforms, such as, for example, Freelancer or Upwork or Fiverr. I assume you know how those platforms work, more or less. Those are digital hubs. They're places where a large number of people come together. There's requesters of digital work and providers of digital work. Who will be matched on those platforms according to their skill, for example. So those platforms, they work as so-called spot markets. And we'll be looking into one platform in particular, and this is Upwork. Just so you get a sense for the magnitude or for the dimensions of this platform, it's a large platform. They have about 14 million users at the moment. They're present in 180 countries around the world, and they facilitate or mediate buildings for about $1 billion annually. What does Upwork do? You know, there's a lot of different work platforms, a lot of different work mediation platforms. There's platforms ranging from very, very low involvement skill or low involvement tasks, such as Amazon Mechanical Turk. There was a presentation yesterday that was talking about that. What Upwork offers is on the other end of the spectrum. So these are not low involvement tasks where I do surveys or do very small tasks such as tagging an image. Those are larger tasks, highly cognitive, such as game development, such as marketing strategy. If you look to the top right corner, if you need help polishing an academic paper, there's even academic writers offering their services on this platform. So this is the kind of labor that is being mediated through this platform, Upwork. And how do these platforms in general, and Upwork in particular, work? They all follow a very similar structure. They're all more or less work with 4 different phases. The first phase is always the phase where you apply for the platform, where you build a profile, where you then, if you're accepted, post a job offering, where you, in a second phase, apply for said offering, or where you, as a requester, where you select potential workers and invite them to make a pitch for said tasks. We have a third phase that would be the work and feedback phase, where the work is actually taking place, where the requester is potentially engaging in some feedback loops, trying to make sure that the worker, the digital worker, is on the right track. This phase is usually concluded with the worker making a payment request. They're saying, no, work is done. Please facilitate the payment, which leads to the 4th and last phase, which is the phase where the payment is actually made, and very importantly, for the worker in particular, where there's also reputation building taking place. So that's where the worker is being rated on their skill. And this again then has implications for the very first phase, whether or not they're going to be able to stay on the platform in the long run. So who is responsible for the quality, for the sustainability of this process? Who's responsible that this process is fair? To a large extent, it's the people, the humans working on the platform. So it's up to the requesters that they do not discriminate, for example, by only hiring non-female coders. For example, that's one issue that has been recurring. And with a lot of research that looks into platform, it's often the humans that are being scrutinized. It's the humans that are being scrutinized for example, discriminating, if you think of the platform Airbnb, for discriminating guests according to their ethnicity. We are proposing to look on the other side, to look at the role of not the humans, but the algorithms in facilitating this process, and in particular in facilitating key moments in this process. And a lot of those algorithmic facilitation processes and decision-making processes are not very transparent. For example, there's one moment that is not very clear in the very first phase of the process. When it comes to applying to the platform, being granted access to the platform, it's often not clear what I have to do to be accepted, to maintain my accepted status on the platform. If I do get flagged or rejected, it's also often not clear what I can do, how I can modify my profile information or my behavior to ensure that I will be allowed to the platform in the future. So this is one key point where we have algorithms shaping not just the way that work is being conducted and facilitated over the platform, but in the end also the final product of the work that is possible at all. A second point where algorithms and algorithmic decision making is important is when it comes to visibility, when it comes to how can I as a worker showcase my work, how visible am I? Am I, for example, being suggested as a particularly high quality worker to someone who has a task in programming? and which are the terms for giving feedback on the platform. That's the third moment, or the third key instance of where algorithms come into play. And that's the question of reputation building. So which exactly are the criteria that I have to follow to get a high rating and to maintain a high rating in a longer term? So summarizing, we have identified, just looking at this platform, Upwork in particular, and about other platforms in general as well, there are three clusters of concerns for algorithmic decision making that keep reappearing or that keep recurring. It's concerns about acceptance, it's concerns about maintaining a high and continuous visibility on the platforms, and it's concerns about ratings, about maintaining a high rating, and about understanding how said rating came to be. And this is, I don't know if you can read this, but this is one example of how Upwork explains how their rating works. They say, well, in order to get a certain rating, we're going to factor in all feedback, whether it's good or bad. We're going to factor in long-term relationships and repeat contracts, and we're going to factor in contracts without activity or excessive lack of feedback. So you see, it's a very, very high flyer reasoning, or a very, very high flyer explanation of how a rating comes to be. Reminds me of what you said about Instagram, that the way Instagram is shaped is by interest, recency, and relationships. So these are the factors that coming in this platform, and I would argue it's equally high flyer and equally difficult for the individuals at the end of this decision-making process to reverse engineer and to assume how a decision came to be. Just to give you one example at the very beginning of the process when it comes to actually applying to the platform, just put yourself in the shoes of a programmer or graphic designer or academic writer who's offering their services on the platform. This might be one touch point. This is how you might perceive or encounter the algorithm on the platform. So you take some time, you build up a profile, you upload your picture, you give your personal information, your track record, everything. Then you hit send, you apply to become a worker on the platform, and it's likely, depending on what field you're in, depending on the profile picture you've chosen, that you will not be accepted. If that happens, you're going to receive a note, such as a note on the left-hand side. It's a little letter from Upwork, and they're going to be telling you, we have carefully reviewed your profile. We cannot accept your registration at this moment. And then they explain this by pointing towards the fact that they're trying to balance your talents and your expertise with currently available projects. And they say they do this for your benefit because they want you ultimately to succeed on the platform. So this is kind of one contact point or one touch point where you would be feeling the algorithmic decision making in a very tangible and very personal and very direct manner. So this is what interested us in this phenomenon. We were interested in how individuals cope with algorithmic decision making, and not just with the processes of algorithmic decision making, but with the outcomes that they're very much affected by in a personal manner. So those are the kind of guiding questions that started us into this research project. The question was, how do workers who are affected by algorithmic decision, how do they make sense of those decisions and of the processes or of the way that those decisions came to be? And how do they perceive their own role and their agency vis-a-vis such algorithmic decision making? And in this we also kind of always had this metaphor of the curtain, of the man behind the curtain that was brought to us by the Wizard of Oz in the back of our heads. We are not so much interested in peeking behind the curtain ourselves. We're not so much interested in deconstructing the algorithms that do make the decisions and in re-engineering the weights, the factors, the probabilities employed. We're interested in so-called folk theories of layman sense-making, of algorithmic decision-making in the context of opacity, in the context of intransparency. Why would it be interesting to look into those folk theories or those layman reverse engineering and sense-making of algorithmic decision-making? We think it's important, I think it's very interesting to understand how workers, as constituents of AI regulators, for example, as audiences, as consumers of organizations, also for example, think about algorithmic decision making. If we think about how we could implement inclusive design, how we could implement regulations that takes into account users' wishes and that is inclusive for them as well. It may not be a goal to create complete transparency, but it may be a goal to design platforms that will not create alienation, for example, that will make it possible for individuals to take part in this in a meaningful and sustainable manner. So this is the background of where we're coming from. What did we do? To get a better understanding of this phenomenon, to better understand how individuals make sense of algorithms and how they perceive their own role, we went on Reddit. We went into online communities where there's a lot of discourse happening in this area, and we used Python to collect a lot of comments, to scrape a lot of comments within the community of digital workers. And then we analyzed those in a ethnography kind of way. We looked into themes, and this is actually still the ongoing part of the research, so this is being wrapped up as we speak, and I'm going to present to you a little bit an insight that we have gained so far from this analysis. And there are two main findings that I would like to talk about a little bit so far. The first is that there's a very positive and very constructive side to this discourse. So there's a lot of people who get together on those platforms and they exchange advice, they exchange tricks and tips and hacks of how to deal with those algorithms, how to be successful vis-a-vis the algorithms, how to boost their acceptance rate, how to boost their visibility, how to achieve or improve a rating that has gotten out of hand, for example. How do they do this? And this is where we see the most kind of folk theories, where we see the most instances of reverse engineering the algorithmic decision-making processes. For example, the first one, would be a tip on how to actually pass this very first threshold, which proves to be the highest threshold or the highest hurdle or obstacle on this process to participation. Is, for example, one user just says, well, if you want to succeed, you should not have a very, very broad profile. You should try to target your skills and your profile to a specific niche, and that will make it much more likely to be approved. Another comment is maybe a coping strategy. It says, don't worry if you're not accepted at first. Don't worry if it doesn't work out. This is part of the hazing stage. So it seems that they're doing this to everyone, and you see the folk theory, the reverse engineering that's going on here very much. That's just something that you have to get through. And once you've applied enough times, once you've restructured your profile enough times, then they will deem you worthy of being a part of this community. So just go through that. Another one, or another theme that we see often, is people trying to circumvent or to hack the platform a little bit. They say, listen, just have a friend call them and or write to them and request you as a worker. This will make it, this will facilitate the process of you being accepted to the platform. So those are sometimes a bit of sketchy pieces of advice, but it's also one theme that we see emerging among those tips or folk theories of how to best up acceptance, visibility, and ratings. Another observation that we made. Okay, I'm gonna wrap this up in 1.5 minutes, if I may. Another observation that we made is, and this would actually be the topic, sorry for being too long here, of this conversation. If you look into the dimensions of alienation, so how do people feel when they're in a situation where they struggle to make sense of the decision that they're subjected to, when they feel powerless, when they have no way, no meaningful way of recourse? That's when we have instances of alienation. And we've been looking into this data set, and we've been seeing those themes, and in particular, those 3 themes of normlessness. Well, people say, I have no idea how my job success score is calculated. I have no idea what I supposedly did wrong. I've been doing this for 19 years, I'm a professional and I still can't pass those tests, that's when we have instances of normlessness, when I don't understand how a decision comes to be. The second alienating factor is the one of meaninglessness, when it's not just me not understanding how the algorithm got there, but when I actually struggle to make sense of the result at all. So when there's changes that I have no idea whether they're good or bad for me, whether it's the fact that I have no idea how something's being calculated. And the last alienating factor also, the most powerful alienating factor that we found is powerlessness. And it's not that they don't know what to do, it's that they don't dare take action to recourse in case of decision that they're not agreeing with. The first one, for example, would say, well, I don't feel like I can't email support at all for fear of getting banned, because they seem to be super ban happy at the moment. And one that says, I want to comment really, really badly, and I feel strongly about these issues, but I'm just not willing to risk losing my access to the platform. So this is also a very, very powerful theme, and we're going to do some more research on that. In the end, it brings us back to this situation and to the questions, what do workers expect to find behind the curtain? And we are expecting to, or we are hoping to get a much more nuanced picture by this in a subsequent study when we're going to do interviews with workers to better understand how this reverse engineering actually works. And then we think it's a really interesting question whether or not also with an eye to the regulators, whether a more transparent algorithm could actually alleviate those feelings of alienation, or whether it's different measures that we have to take. Thank you very much. Sorry about the time delay. You said you had time, right?
Is there any question? Please come here.
Hi, thank you very much. Very interesting talk. My question, or maybe it's a question or a comment or suggestion, is I was thinking about Uber and about like the really, like the really little power that the drivers have in order to decide price, in order to decide like which rides to take, or where, like they cannot really do anything. So there are all these like bargaining rights, collective rights that they are not being recognized. And what I'm wondering also is like, because when you also enter into a contract, you have like some power of like debating, right? Like with the employer or like with the other contract party, like what are the terms and conditions of this? So like I'm asking whether if transparency is enough, like whether like policymakers should actually look at this and say, well, you can be as transparent as you want, but there are like certain requirements that you need to meet either way. That's the question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very, very much. I think to the first part, yeah, it's actually a very interesting insight, and we've been talking about this transferability of this approach and of those findings into the context of other platforms and other services as well, because as you say, in a situation where you're in an Uber, you might have the exact same concerns at some point, even though there you might have a bit more actual human interaction, but it's true, it would be the same concerns. What was the second part of the question? Yes,
whether there should be like a much more a broader understanding, like saying like, well, there are like minimal rules that you need to follow in any case, like even if they are transparent, like is it fair that they like have no power, like over like
yeah.
Should we expect them to have the same opportunities like in front of another one, or
yeah, exactly.
Is like what is going to add transparency like to the fairness of the social?
Yes, exactly. I think that was also the reason why we had this question at the end. Is transparency really the key, or is it just part maybe of a solution, or is just kind of approaching the question from the other side? It's not. Do we want to make everything that happens within or behind the curtain, do we want to make that transparent? It's possible that we don't need to make that completely transparent in order to address those alienating factors, for example. It's possible that if we look specifically into why people feel alienated, because they feel they have no recourse, they have no power, they have no possibility to appeal a decision that is made. It's because they feel that there's normal says they have trouble understanding how specific decisions in terms of acceptance or in terms of visibility have come to pass. So maybe that will be a much more meaningful approach to this. Yeah, I agree with that.
I guess there are many questions.
Thank you so much. It was both presentations have been great. A couple things. Number one, about kind of following up on your comment on Uber. I was wondering, even from the point of view, so you spoke about the perspective from the drivers, okay? But even us, we're supposed to give feedback, right? And one of the things that I think is totally not transparent, and I've wondered about in the past, is when we rate a driver, let's say we give a low rate, does the driver know? I've always wondered this. Does the driver know who is giving a bad rate, or does he gets it right away, I think. But I don't know because I'm not a driver. So that's another thing. I've given good scores, but the bad scores, I don't know about the incentive because I worry that this information is being kept somewhere, either with the driver, who knows my address, by the way, or with the company. So this is another kind of lack of transparency that I think can affect how people use these technology. But that's just a small comment about this. Now, kind of linking up between the two presentations, I'm wondering if then someone who feels alienated by the lack of transparency can go onto Instagram. And because there is no recourse, I understand that. And I wonder if there are certain things that involve maybe using other platforms in order to get, or maybe Facebook to some extent, to kind of like inform the company in an indirect way or whatever way is available to them that they are not content with the outcome. And finally, which I think may be the most relevant point to your research, think about how decisions are made outside of algorithms, okay? Think about, we've all applied here to universities. Sometimes we expected to get in, we didn't. Why? No clue, okay? I'll give you an example. My daughter applied to this program at Tel Aviv University for juniors in science, for like promoting science for girls and women. I was sure she'd get in. Yesterday we were told, didn't get in, no explanation. Oh yeah, I could give them a call, I could ask them, I'm probably not going to do it. So I'm just giving these examples because I think it's important to compare to other processes that we have that don't involve AI and don't involve algorithms, where we are equally in the opaque situation where we don't know why a decision was made. What were the criteria? Is it because she comes from an all-girl religious school in Tel Aviv, and maybe the girls from the non-religious schools were accepted into this program? How do I know? I have no idea what their criteria were, and I would like to challenge them. I don't know. So the point is, we feel alienated. Do we feel more alienated when it's because it's done by some kind of algorithm than when it's using human intelligence? Do we even have more recourse when it's a human decision? I don't think so. So, I mean, those are, I think, interesting comparisons to make as part of your research.
What is true is that we are alienated. When the university doesn't answer and doesn't give you a reason why they didn't accept your...
Thank you. Well, to answer your second question or comment first, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the small anecdote of one data point that we found. There was one user, and he was very active on those forums and the discourse that was happening on those online communities. And he said, well, I would never ask this in the support forum of Upwork. But since I know that they will probably be reading this forum, this is where I place my concerns. So this is exactly what's happening. The users, they find other ways to make their voices heard and to participate in a kind of a conversation that they couldn't, or that they feel that they couldn't. Yeah, they try to make it a conversation, right? Because it's very, very much one way so far. Yeah, that's true. So they come up with ways. I would not say it's the majority way, but some of them are trying to come up and find a way to address this. And the very interesting question, whether or not there are similarities in the feeling or the degree of the alienation feeling, depending on whether or not there is a human being behind the curtain or an algorithm, it just made me think of a presentation that was a very interesting presentation from yesterday, when someone compared the expert status of humans and algorithms. You remember the presentation well. So that might factor in, right? That the algorithm is, at the end of the day, even if it's fallible, maybe more or less of an authority, maybe more or less alienating to be judged or by an algorithm or by a human being. I don't know that. That would be an interesting thing to look into. Do you want to?
Question from Elena.
Okay, if I understand well, you have applied a reverse engineering technique in a job recruiting platform. It's true? It's correct?
In a community forum where people
Okay.
talking, exchanging ideas, or venting about their experience on such a work platform.
Okay.
We're not on the platform itself, it was in other forum where they got together and
Okay, so you don't have a case study on a hiring platform for now. It's correct?
no, it's not a case study.
Okay.
It's a study of the user discourse surrounding a specific platform.
Okay, so I'm wondering, do you think that there are some specific characteristics or traits of alienation that make the feelings of alienation in people? I don't know if it's clear, but for example, when you applied reverse engineering technique, you can, for example, rate the variable in a model. So you can discover which kind of characteristics or which kind of variable weights with respect to the other. And with respect to your study, do you discover if there are some specific characteristics that constitutes the alienation feelings?
We've been starting off of the conceptualization of alienation that's not so much based in the Marxist tradition, but in the social psychological tradition, as introduced by Seemann. So those were the themes and the factors that we were looking into, those kind of 5 aspects of alienation, as in meaninglessness, normlessness, estrangement, powerlessness, and alienation and isolation. But we did not find proof of all those 5 characteristics. For example, the isolation aspect kind of is alleviated because there are, even though not on the platform, but surrounding the platform, there are various ways in which there's a consensus that workers get together and can talk about issues. But those were the aspects of alienation that we were looking into thus far, and we're hoping to do some quantitative study on that as well, just to see how pronounced each of those aspects are, if they can be retraced. Thank you.
I know there are some other questions, many questions, but because we have 1 hour left, I would say let's listen to the other presentations, and if we have time at the end, we can continue this discussion and we can pose the questions to the speakers. Thank you very much. So I leave the word to Maciej. Maciej, sì? So, first of all, a short presentation of Maciej Kuziemski. He's a PhD researcher at the Science Policy Research Unit at the University of Sussex, UK. And he's a 2018-2019 Fulbright Schumann Visiting Research Fellow with the program on Science, Technology and Society at the Harvard Kennedy School. He works on US government's algorithmic practices and also on socio-technical imaginaries of algorithms and their influence over public sector practices in the US and in the UK. His interests include citizen empowerment, policy design, and public sector innovation.
Thanks so much. Actually, now that you said it, I think it would be such a great idea if University of Sussex was called the University of Success. That would be a great name. I hope that someone will pick it up. First of all, thanks for having me. Fantastic workshop and great presentations so far. Keeping it to the curtain metaphor, I'll talk about who makes the curtains or who controls where the curtains are. I am planning to talk about the publics and the policy-making processes that surround the creation and the limitations of AI and algorithms. And I pose a question in the title of my presentation: what do UK publics expect from algorithms? And I don't want to spoil too much, but the honest answer is no idea. We don't know that. And what follows will be an explanation on how these policy-making processes related to AI do not offer us answers to that question, and why this is somewhat problematic. But let's start from the other end. Why should we care about AI? Why I certainly care about AI and why I think it's important. First of all, AI is currently experiencing one of its peak hypes as measured by investment volume, academic articles, or salience in the media. Second of all, the widespread impacts have been described by a number of scholars in such varied areas as job provisions, human rights, healthcare, law enforcement, among others. And finally, and to me most importantly, AI becomes a sort of a mental shortcut. So I see it as a sort of almost an empty concept, also almost a useless concept, but certainly a metaphor of desired and undesired epistemic and normative states of the world, a repository of hope, for instance, to solve humanity's grand challenges, but also fear about, let's say, extinction of human race. There are some people who think so. Interestingly, from the policy-making perspective, a panacea or a fix to solve some really old, intractable problems. Now, it's been famously stated by Professor Collingridge that in the early phases of emergence of new technology, the technology is highly flexible. We can control it, but we lack the knowledge to predict its impacts. In the later phases, we have the necessary information and knowledge on its impacts, but because the technology has become entrenched, control or change is no longer possible. Or in other words, as put by Yevgeny Morozov, when change is easy, the need for it cannot be foreseen. When the need for change is apparent, change has become expensive, difficult, and time-consuming. Change is possible as long as technologies are emerging and before they reach the phase of stabilization when the spectrum of normative choices narrows down. Has AI reached such a phase? This is an open-ended question that I hope we'll be able to discuss. The performativity of future states of the world has been central to the academic inquiry of the discipline that I'm operating in, which is a discipline of science technology studies. In particular, the notions of expectations, visions, and socio-technical imaginaries have played a significant role in conceptualizing the ways meaning and knowledge are constructed. Despite superficial similarities, these three approaches involve significant assumptions. Expectations imply a collective character and plausibility of future situations and capabilities, as well as possible confinement to one particular technology. Visions make claims about social order, often relaying to a fuller portrait of an alternative world. In contrast to these two approaches, socio-technical imaginaries focus on questions around power and politics of decision-making, while investigating how certain technological pathways are foreclosed and how other are legitimated. I'm quite fond of the latter approach, socio-technical imaginary, and I find it quite fitting to study AI policymaking. In the words of concepts authors, Sheila Jasanoff and Professor Kim, socio-technical imaginaries are collectively imagined forms of social life and social order reflected in the design and fulfillment of nation-specific scientific and technological projects. Conceptually developed, this theory, this framework, has been present in myriad strands, ranging from Western philosophy, Sartre, Kant, to psychoanalysis, social theory, Castoriadis, Anderson, Appadurai, Taylor, to finally science fiction, Mary Shelley, Aldous Huxley, Donna Haraway, Stanisław Lem, among others. And it's very successfully in recent years deployed to study such diverse issues as national identities, as far as technopolitics is concerned, 3D printing, autonomous systems, search engines, and digital communications in general. Now, since I hope we established that expectations, visions, and imaginaries are key elements for understanding technological development, it is somewhat striking to me how limited is a pool of stakeholders deciding about AI pathways and directions. But let's take a look about the very policymaking processes related to AI. Back in the 1960s, when John Kennedy was elected, there were calls for him to hold a conference around robots and labor. He declined. Fast forward 50 years, we are facing an unprecedented regulatory salience surrounding AI development on municipal, national, and global level. Ethical standards, codes of conduct, industrial strategies are created by governments, universities, corporations, and international organizations. The process of AI development is top-down and expert-driven. Resources are concentrated in the hands of the few due to first-mover advantage, economies of scale, private-public sector power asymmetries, many other factors that have been discussed during this and preceding conference. The same is very true for AI policymaking, championed by elite industrial groups such as World Economic Forum, rich country clubs such as OECD, or highbrow academic circles. And I guess this is us. Most importantly, majority of policy framing, shaping, and making happens outside of the processes of direct democratic legitimization. This is not exactly right, I thought, and started looking for where voices from below could be heard. That's how I ended up looking at governmental public consultations. These are known among social scientists to offer a rare occasion to observe public discourses and divergent approaches to science and technology controversies. Important to note, there is a bunch of private sector consultation processes, such as ones run by IEEE, Future Society, or MIT's Moral Machine, but these could easily be a subject of another paper. Where to look, I thought, if not at the United Kingdom, still perhaps one of the most serious democracies of the world, and more importantly, a fantastically run bureaucracy. So I looked no further than UK House of Lords, that operates an interesting scheme of so-called select committees that have been introduced by a reform in 1979, but stem from a longer tradition where the upper chamber would take a wider and kind of further looking view at the cross-cutting issues that are concern of British nation. A modus operandi of these committees, these select committees, is quite similar. They would deliberate on the topic of interest on their own. They would summon civil servants and external experts, and then they would run open calls for evidence where everyone could contribute. This last mechanism is projected as a powerful way to engage the general public. Here, the voice of concerned citizens can be heard before the government's policies are implemented. All findings gathered in the process would neatly form a report and send over to the relevant ministry that would then have few months to respond in writing. Interestingly, a recent impact assessment found out that around 40% of recommendations of such select committees are accepted and implemented by the government. So calls for evidence are widely communicated through a variety of platforms, despite our preconception about House of Lords, and maybe, kind of confirmed by the image that I used. This is a very modern process. Anyone can submit evidence, be it by snail mail, email, or in person. House of Lords website provides legible tutorials, videos, PDFs on how to do it. Wow, I thought. An ideal situation, an open, transparent consultation process on issues of strategic relevance where every citizen can contribute with a high likelihood of influence of policy making. Sounds a little bit too idyllic, doesn't it? Armed with that optimism, I have stumbled upon a new committee established by the House of Lords in June 2017. It looked like a perfect site for an inquiry into how the publics want the AI-powered future to look like. The questions posed by the committee, I'm not sure if that's legible, don't worry about it, the questions could not be better. What are the current and future impacts of AI? How these could be mitigated? What is morally acceptable and what is not? What role for the government to play? These are indeed fundamental questions, I thought, written in a non-technical language that caters to a wide audience. On paper, everything looked great. Consultation process has generated 223 written responses, around half and half from institutions and individuals, amounting to over 1,500 pages of content, neatly published online by a swift UK bureaucracy. All major universities, industrial bodies, corporations have submitted their responses, some of them very lengthy and in-depth. But that wasn't what I was interested in. I was looking after the individual views. With that in mind, I started carving through the other 700 pages of responses by individuals. Long story short, to my surprise, vast majority of the individual responses, over 110 of them, were prepared by academics, by folks like us, either academics as established to operate almost as one-person institutions, or responding on behalf of their universities. This is exactly not what I was hoping for. Only less than 10 responses from those 223 were voicing the hopes and concerns of the publics. And in lieu of a summary or findings, let me just read an excerpt from one of these few brave citizens who decided to partake in this consultation process. I couldn't possibly use better words to express what I think is flawed with the way AI policy making is operating. So giving the floor to Donald Clerk, an engineer from Scotland. You should check what I'm about to say with some experts, but my intuition tells me that right now the future is being invented for people by the scientists, engineers, and entrepreneurs who create, develop, and deploy technology. Most of these people are trying to create things that are useful and safe, but of course, it is their definition of what is useful and safe. And the people who create, develop, and deploy new technologies have a vested interest in it. For the academics, it is their career. For the engineers, it is their career. For the entrepreneurs, it is they who, more than anything else, stand to make a lot of money from artificial intelligence. To counterbalance the viewpoint of the people who have a vested interest in developing those technologies, the general public needs to be able to participate in an intelligent and responsible way in decisions about what humanity does with technology. We, meaning all of us, need to understand the impact technology has on our lives so that decisions about what we do with technology are made based upon what is good for people, not just what is good for business or for the people who have a vested interest in developing and deploying new technologies. In order for the public to participate in a meaningful way, it is not necessary for everybody to suddenly start becoming programmers or data scientists or AI experts. It is necessary to become educated about what technology, what effects technology have on people in human terms. To understand this, it is almost better not to become too technically knowledgeable. And I think this is very important. To understand it, this is almost better not to become too technically knowledgeable. The value of public participation will come precisely because the general public is not part of the science, technology, business community that is developing AI. And I'll end here. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, thank you so much for this. I have a short question because I'm planning to do like a similar research in Poland. So I was wondering, how would you go about gathering more than 10 responses from people who are not from academia or from businesses? How would you encourage them? What sort of incentives or what sort of techniques or methods would you use to gather these responses?
Now, this is a great question, and one of the organizations that I'm occasionally working with, and maybe some of you know it, it's called NEXA, National Endowment for Science, Technology and Arts in the UK. It's a public sector organization because it was endowed by public money, although it operates in this funny model where they have a lot of private sector clients and they're very independent from the government. They have been struggling with that question, and recently, I think just a few months ago, they have embarked on this exercise where they would use ethnographic, qualitative methods and deploy researchers to go to the factories and to the Fivers and Upworks of this world and interview in person people who are at the forefront of automation. Uber drivers, Amazon Mechanical Turk, outsourcees, or whatever the word is, etc., etc. And this is fantastic because we are presented with this vision that that AI is this very kind of sophisticated, black boxed, hard to understand, expert-driven technology, right? But when it comes down to what's at stake, we're discussing about very rudimentary issues such as democratic legitimacy, due process, rule of law, equity, equality, etc., etc. Things that we expect all citizens to have an opinion about. So I see what Nest is doing as a kind of fascinating effort to to go to the people and in a very skilled and well, simple way, in a way, ask right questions and try to derive answers that not necessarily use technical lingo, probably not even talk much about machine learning, etc., and then try to translate it into policy inputs that could be fed into the work of the central government.
Yeah, thank you very much for this talk. It was really interesting. Just following up on the last point, more or less, are you aware of the Pew Internet research study that came out 2 weeks ago? It's about algorithms and public perception.
No, not really.
Because they really ask what you just described, like real-life scenarios, algorithms in hiring, algorithms in financial decisions. So they worked with concrete cases. And they could show that the majority of Americans were opposed to algorithms making such important decisions. So it's kind of a really good study.
Is it a Pew research?
Yes.
It's a Pew research.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So they've.
Pew research. P-E-W. Yes. Sorry, I misheard. I thought it was Pew.
No, Pew. And it came out on the 16th of November.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. Although I must say that I like the. I totally appreciate the work, but I'd say that I appreciate Nesta's work even more because it's more on a kind of personal side, and I think there are groups. I mean, of course, everyone should have an opinion. Everyone's opinion should be heard. But first and foremost, the people who are most vulnerable. And for some reason, I think in the high impact, kind of statistical studies, the voices of the most at risk are not exposed in a good way.
Thank you very much. How many of these 200 and something responses were from NGOs that are supposed to represent the public concern, the public interest?
I'd say 15, maybe %. Yeah. Well, it's one would have to kind of try to unpack and what NGOs mean, right? Because NGOs are, for instance, there's this trend of like starting lobbying groups that are disguised as NGOs, for instance, by multinationals, right? So to represent the interests, etc. But I'd say the legit NGOs would be a really small faction. That would be like maybe 10%, yeah, not more.
Thank you. Then I would pass to the last presentation. Thank you very much, Maciej. And now it's Anna Ivanova's time. Just a moment, Anna. Because my PC, okay, because I want to give you a short presentation of your bio. Anna is completing her master's studies at the Department of Public Law, University of Cape Town, South Africa. She completed her undergraduate degree at the University of Cologne. With a specialization in European and international law, and she passed the first state exam at the higher regional court in Cologne. Her current research focuses on artificial intelligence, the present state of development and future opportunities, and the possibility of introducing legal personality to AI agents under international law with reference to the legal framework this could require. You have an issue with the... you don't have the presentation.
It's not in the computer, but it's here. It's neither of this. You sure? No, that's fine. That's
No?
but it's okay.
Don't you have your personal PC?
It wasn't graphically that.
It wasn't... So you have all your points in a paper? Okay. Thank you very much.
It's not a problem. Don't worry.
You sure?
Yeah.
That's April.
It's okay. It's really not that.
Are you sure you can do it without? Over there? Okay.
Thank you. Should I? Thank you very much for having me here. Maybe some of you have faced like this roller coaster kind of emotions when you approach a new area of research where you have no idea, and you're first excited and then you get frustrated and then you get excited again and then you're so self-confident and think like you've figured it out, and you have not. And yeah, that was kind of my experience with AI, especially with AI and with international law. Besides the drama going on, I would like to present my research in legal personality of artificial intelligence under international law. And first, maybe refer to legal personality, to the term, then to the term of artificial intelligence, and then maybe try to introduce some combinations, some possibilities, how we could combine both, and what kind of dangers or exciting opportunities this might offer. So to the term of international legal personality, in international law we find a division between subjects and objects, and only subjects have legal personality, only they have the capacity of possessing legal rights and obligations. And through many centuries it was considered that only states are subjects of international law. This more or less influenced by the positivist view. Then in 1949, the International Court of Justice confirmed in its advisory opinion to the reparations for injuries case that international organizations such as the UN also possess international legal personality, and this paved the way also for other actors on the international legal scene, such as NGOs and individuals. And in that sense, the decision was, or the advisory opinion was very revolutionary. The legal argumentation is still being used to confirm legal personality up to some point for NGOs and individuals. And now, not all scholars and practitioners are really satisfied with the term of legal personality, how it's defined and used, and especially, or not especially, but for example, Judge Higgins, the former president of the International Court of Justice, she suggested rather the idea of participants. That she considered much better than the division in subjects and objects. And the participation would depend on the particular area of international law and how engaged and how involved certain entities within this area. So as life changes, so would law change, so would also the prerequisites for participation change. And that would make it quite more flexible. Now, this kind of opens the door to the question whether AI agents could also be subjects or participants in international law. And now, in order to refer to that better, to examine that better, I looked at AI and the definition under international law, and apparently there is no uniform legal definition. There are some suggestions, for example, in the European Parliament resolution of 2017. There they offer some characteristic of a smart robot. Some of them could be, well, to keep it short, self-learning and acquisition of autonomy to some point, and adaptation to the environment. Now, due to the limited time frame, I will only talk a little bit about machine learning and neural networks and the complex combined systems. Now, deep machine learning is basically the idea that we have an AI agent that takes the input data, evaluates it on the basis of an algorithm, and then learns from this experience, and makes predictions on the basis of that. There are different algorithmic approaches, for example, neural networks, or as we heard also earlier today, the decision tree learning, clustering. Yeah, the variety is great. So within deep machine learning, we differentiate between supervised, unsupervised, semi-supervised, depending on whether the input data is labeled or not. And there's also, I think, the reinforcement machine learning used in many computer games. We have an award that is introduced to the AI agent, and we define a purpose or a goal. And depending on how close the AI agent gets to achieving the goal, or how it optimizes the way of getting there, it receives the award. Yeah, one of the most sufficient now ways of algorithmic approaches is the neural network or artificial neural networks, and they're inspired by the biology of the human brain. They consist basically of layers of nodes and weights and biases that can be adjusted, and the central part of the network is actually the so-called black box. Now the black box is basically hidden layers. They can the variety of the layers could change. They could be, for example, 3 or 15. The number could be different, and the complexity of the nodes. So this makes the system quite complex, or the system could be quite complex. So it could evaluate great amounts of input data. One of the central processes of this neural network is the backpropagation. It could be said how the network learns, but this backpropagation is based on a mathematical model that you apply, that you program into it, and also an algorithm before that. So another mathematical algorithmic step. So when we talk about complexity and about how many of these layers there could be, this is a way of explaining why is it so hard sometimes to retrace the outputs. So it's actually, in my understanding, it is the complexity of the network and the data that makes the outputs unpredictable. It is not truly autonomous decision. Autonomous in the technical sense up to a certain point, but not truly autonomous in the legal or maybe social sense. So that would apply also for combined AI systems. For example, a complex AI agent, another algorithm that then initiates action based on the predictions of the neural network. Now, this action would also be actually retraceable to a mathematical model, and therefore maybe not truly autonomous, depending how we define autonomous decision also philosophically. But disregarding the philosophical side of the question, so no autonomy in the legal sense. Now, these combined systems are very, very specified now. I think now we lack the power capacities, or the tools that we use, the computers that we use are not that powerful to generate systems that could learn on parallel levels. So they become very specified. For example, a self-driving car that could perform that task, but not also, I don't know, talk on the phone or sing a song while driving. These are bad examples, but not evaluating data and learning from it on parallel levels. Maybe new developments, especially in the field of quantum computing, maybe they could change this. Maybe the new possibilities will be open so that an algorithm could learn from various channels. But now, to the central part of the topic, how could an AI agent look like? An AI agent with a legal personality look like? There are a few ideas I will try to introduce, and it might sound like a scenario for a science fiction movie at a time. But probably the most probable scenario that scholars consider is the corporation. Maybe it's the easiest way of imagining how it could work. Now, a few scholars have examined the possibility of a corporation, and it is said that, or it is claimed that general international law tends to treat corporations like individuals. It doesn't really differentiate on many levels. Now, corporate law and international business law have a big problem with this, and normally scholars refer to international business law for it has more deeper insights into corporate structures. And business scholars, they claim that the cooperation fails to really mirror the individual economical behavior of the individual members. It kind of develops its own dynamics. And the same could be claimed for an AI agent, for example. There is a scholar, I think, legal scholar Sean Bayer. He wrote a few papers on the subject, and he examined different domestic legal systems and how they could host an AI agent, and different corporate structures, especially the limited liability company and the foundation, and whether there is a possibility for them to be governed only by a sufficient algorithm, even at the present state, not as a futuristic option. So he found that that possibility is actually there. And if an AI agent is sufficient enough to make predictions on the basis of the input data, evaluate it, and then initiate certain actions, then it could be granted rights, and even under international law. Any kind of business could be conducted globally nowadays. An example would be an AI agent that takes the predictions of a neural network and then buys or sells something like an AI broker that trades internationally. Now this, if introduced to such rights, this agent would be then granted with legal personality, and if such rights are violated, then there could be another representative agent that would claim and enforce the rights. Maybe in front of an international tribunal, of new tribunals that could be created for that purpose. Maybe these new tribunals could be inspired by international investment law, because the same process happened there. Another, to go with this idea further, such an agent that would claim the rights of an AI company could also be a state. It could either be the state where the company is registered, so something like the nationality of the AI company, or maybe any state that has any legal interest, maybe based on economic interest. And then that state could exercise the right of diplomatic protection and enforce or claim the rights of the AI company in front of the international tribunal. And when it comes to the other side, when it comes to liability to the duties, let's suppose that in the future such a company or such an algorithm would be so sufficient that it would also be able to govern a financial basis, basically also like a corporation. Then it would be able to, that financial basis or that financial fund would be there for maybe to secure certain liabilities and to be attached in the future. Or another, maybe a more probable option is that the agent, the actor that puts the algorithm on the market is liable in the initial state of creating such a financial fund, or maybe some kind of an insurance to cover in cases of confirmed liability and in cases of damages. That would very, very remotely remind of the relationship between parents and children, for example, when it comes to liability. So another option, which sounds actually quite unrealistic for the present state, is an international organization governed by AI, so only governed by an AI agent. For the present state, it sounds very unrealistic, but there are certain states, for example, Estonia, that are working very ambitiously on projects of introducing legal personality to AI in their domestic systems. And we have Saudi Arabia. They granted citizenship to Sofia, I think. So maybe in future, such states, if the number of such states rises, then they will decide to transfer the experience they've made with AI agents with legal personality on the international arena, and maybe create such an international organization only governed by AI. Maybe the most utopian or improbable idea is that an AI agent will be granted with legal personality that would remind of the legal personality of individuals, of natural persons. This would mean that states would gather and sign a declaration for AI rights, which might happen in the future. Such right could be the right to develop or the right to have human interaction in order to self-develop. Who knows what the future might bring? Or maybe AI agents within defense industry will become criminally liable and will be judged in front of international criminal tribunals in some distant future, hopefully not ever. But to conclude, there are many scholars do not like the idea or really oppose the idea of legal personality of artificial intelligence, and this has good reasons. This could create a technical veil, liability scapegoat, so that in many cases it would be difficult to pierce that and to find someone responsible. And on the other hand, the danger is there that the legal system neglects the opportunity, not even the opportunity, but the obligation to create regulations that would kind of govern the initial process of creation and testing of AI, so that it is released in a responsible manner on the market. If legal personality is introduced, this might be neglected, and such regulations may not be, legal scholars may not work on them as intensively as they should. And still considering this, it should still be recognized that this area is developing rapidly, and the legal system cannot overlook that. It maybe should start considering the idea of legal personality in order to be able to shape the developments in a really sustainable and responsible matter, and so that we are all societies not faced with a legal vacuum, especially in this area, which now determines such a great part of our lives. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you.
Are there questions for Anna? Yeah.
So first of all, thank you very much for the overview of the different possibilities that we can have when dealing with artificial intelligence and the topic of giving or not giving legal personalities. So also considering what has been said during the first day of the conference between IFA and Jerusalem, so there were two presentations on legal personhood and citizenship, so focusing also on the fact that Saudi Arabia given the citizenship to Sophia. My question was, so you were describing possibilities that were referring to legal concepts that we already have in place. So the relationship, like considering them as corporation, or considering like the relationship between parents and children you were mentioning. And my question is, in your opinion, do we need to come up with something completely new, or can we rely on concepts that we already have in legal system in place for years and years, and we just have to reread them under a different light? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, great question. Because I was trying to find a concept that would be very new and that would kind of tackle the question. Because at the beginning I thought, okay, it's a completely new phenomenon, so we need a completely new system. But at the present point, I'm not that sure if if at least the effects that we see now in society, if they are that new in a way. I'm especially especially the lack of this true autonomy kind of I don't know, kind of not the set not made me in a pessimistic mood, but maybe I was the only person who was kind of disappointed that AI agents are not that advanced anymore, not able to have like truly autonomous actions. I think that if there is such a new model, because I don't think that even there are so many projects right now, even AI learning from interaction with human beings, and the complexity of this might become huge, so that at the end we won't be able really to retrace the decision making. But I think if we are to come up with a new model, which might become necessary at some point, there must be a very, very close collaboration with engineers. Because I noticed I didn't want to approach the question only from the legal side of view, from philosophical side of view, because I thought, okay, there must be, this is something that is happening now, and you need to first understand it in order to find a way to regulate it. And engineers have a totally different point of view when approaching the question. So it is like looking from different sides, from different points of view. I don't know truly how such a model could look like, what kind of new approach we can develop. But I think there is even I mentioned these international tribunals that could be created. In my opinion, there need to be engineers on these tribunals. The more points of view are involved, the better, especially from the creators, especially from people who understand the mind behind the machine or the mathematics, this language. Because I think we maybe from legal background, I personally do not speak the language of mathematics. It takes me such a long time to understand the concept. And so yeah, if we have to write laws about it, they should be with someone who understands the phenomena. Yeah.
I give the word to the lady here.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. I was actually wondering about your motivation. I mean, what can we gain if we will provide AI with legal personality? Because if you will compare it to companies, for instance, the fact that companies have legal personality many times enables the pioneers, the managers of the companies, the people who are actually responsible for the decision of the company to avoid from legal responsibility. And I'm afraid that if we will have the same thing also regarding AI, if we will perceive AI as having autonomous legal personality, it will enable the engineers, the people who are beyond the AI, who put the information in the AI, to avoid legal responsibility in cases of damages, in cases of discriminations, things like that. So I also want to hear about your motivations, not only the intellectual one, and the implication that you think that this kind of comparison can have.
I think this is one of the great concerns, and I think even an advisory opinion written by a legal scholar for the European Parliament and for the European Commission was very much focusing on that. And the conclusion at the end was, please no legal personality. This would have so much negative effect, and it could actually create more irritation in life, on the market. Well, 2 points maybe. I think that yes, it could become more difficult if we create this technical veil, but I think there are mechanisms now also to avoid responsibility. The mechanisms are there. It depends on the mindset of the people, whether they would refer to them or not. Introducing another legal instrument, I don't know if that would affect negatively that much, or it would just, or people won't do this with or without it. And something positive that might come out of that would be that it enables us to gain experience, because I think that the way AI develops, or the way I understood it, is that AI agents develop also very fast through interactions when they're exposed to interactions with other actors within certain environments. In order to achieve complexity, if that is the goal, if we want AI agents to become more complex, and we want to maybe see how far we can come, maybe we will be able to create something overwhelming, then I think this will offer a possibility to interact more on the market under a completely different legal prerequisite. This would, offer more opportunities of interaction, and then maybe kind of speed up the development. And on the other hand, offer some kind of legal basis so that there could be, so that regulations could be created. But future will show, I guess.
We have 3 more minutes, so short last question.
Hi, thank you very much. It was very interesting. One of my questions was like, why you focus on corporations more? In 1999, in the U.S., there was the Uniform Electronic Transactions Act, where in Section 14 it talks about electronic agents, and actually the European Parliament is focusing on electronic personality. So I was like wondering, like, why corporations and not electronic agents, if that would be like maybe the idea. And then also, what are your visions on the compensation scheme that would be created? Because corporations may have the possibility to have money, insurance, etc. But like such a personality like might not work in the same way. So like I would like to understand like what is the compensation that you have in mind when you would like to have like this personality to agents. Thank you.
To the electronic agents, I use cooperation, or I focused on cooperation maybe because I couldn't imagine at the beginning how, for example, AI with legal personality would look like. And cooperation was, for me personally, a good example, because it is not, you don't have the individual there, and you have decision. In most of the cases, or in a lot of the cases. Maybe that's why I took cooperation. But there were a lot before. There was no time like to present this, but there was a case, I think, from the Tasmanian court. Electronic agent would be probably better. It would be better as an example. But there was also a case in front of the Tasmanian court where a family, well, I don't know exactly the specifics, but they wanted a frozen embryo to inherit, and asked the court if that would be possible. And the court found that fetuses could inherit. So if it could be determined that the child would be born after the death date, or the presumed death date. So there was no problem with that, and that was kind of
comparison?
Actually, yes, like in civil law, we have like the concepts of ad nasciturum, but also ad concepturus, like also like the concept of like what it could be like so like not only like fetus, like but also like the So like what I see is like that there are like a lot of, I think that it goes in line with Luisa was saying, like so there's corporations, there are animals, nature has rights. So like there are like a lot of so like I am working on a paper called robothood. So like because everyone is talking about personhood, agenthood, and so on, but there is no such a like a specific case of AI-hood. So like I think that all of these theories kind of have like different flaws, right? Like AI is not a sentient being, and then corporations might have like different flaws. So like maybe. Like if you're working on this, like maybe one approach would be like to collect all the flaws that all these different comparisons like give you, and then like try to come up with a model that somehow solves the problems of these correlations.
Yes.
I apologize, but we have to close the discussion here, but we can continue because now there is a break.
Now we have a break for 30 minutes, so we can continue the discussion.
We can continue? No, we stop here and we continue the discussion in the break. Okay. Thank you very much.